Hi guys, welcome back. So today I want to talk about paying company drivers. Currently, the two competing payment types on the market are percentage pay, where the driver gets paid a percentage of the gross of the load, or pay per mile. Let's dig a little deeper. Ready? Let's go! Now, I'm not going to be talking about the shady side or the honest side. I will just present you with the facts so that you can make your own decision. In our company, we let the driver decide how he or she wants to get paid, whether it be percentage of the load or pay per mile. But for you to make a solid, well-informed decision about which payment structure to choose, you have to know the facts. So consideration 1, transparency. I talk about trust and transparency so much that I could easily make a 3-hour video talking about just that.
Please don't.
Don't worry, I won't bore you. Even though we as a company place very high value on trust and transparency, it doesn't mean that every carrier out there does the same. This means that drivers no longer trust the people they're working for. So how does this whole thing relate to the topic of payment? When you're being paid on a per mile basis, it's actually much easier for you as a driver to track how much you're getting paid and whether you're getting underpaid. Now, good carriers should be using programs like Rand McNally to calculate your trip miles and share those miles with you so that you know what to expect. This also allows you to compare the miles that the carrier calculated to the miles that your GPS is showing you. Now, good carriers are not great carriers. We, for example, use Rand McNally to calculate our miles. But in terms of payment for the miles, we use actual miles traveled, which means odometer readings. Now, every single truck we have has an ELD in it. Now, yes, of course, it's used primarily for hours of service. However, on the carrier side, we can also track things like your miles. And the great part is that ELD device connects to the brain of the truck. So it sees the actual odometer reading and calculates actual mileage. So what do? We pull that report from our ELD system and we send that report to the driver. What do we have to hide? That way the driver can see exactly what miles he or she has accrued during a certain time period. Now let me show you a quick video of how it actually works. So this is the example of the report I was talking about. We can see via the electronic logging device exactly what the start odometer was, the end odometer was, the distance for each trip, and it calculates every single time you drive. So there's no way of getting it wrong. So you have your start time, you have your name, of course I blanked it out here, the type of event, which will always be driving, and the origin, destination, duration, the start and end odometer, and the distance as well. That way, we're never undercompensating those miles. Of course, some of these miles will not be compensated. For example, if it's a personal trip, using the truck to go from somewhere, in a truck stop to a restaurant, that is not compensable. But for the most part, this is what we use in order to compensate our drivers. So using this kind of system ensures that you never get underpaid for your actual miles. Now, when it comes to percentage of the load pay, this is where a lot of drivers start getting a little bit nervous, and for good reason. Now, in an ideal world, a carrier will book a load and pay the percentage agreed upon to the driver from that load. But in the real world, a lot of carriers lie to a lot of their drivers. The carrier will book a load that's worth $1,000, tell the driver that they booked a load worth $800, and pay the percentage on that $800, not the actual $1,000. Now, as I mentioned before, we do offer percentage pay of the load if the driver so chooses. But most drivers opt for cents per mile pay, and I understand why. Do we lie about the loads we book? No. Does that mean that all drivers trust us or will trust us? Also no. That's why they get the choice of how they want to get paid. Consideration 2, empty miles. Most carriers today who pay their drivers on a pay per mile basis will pay also for the empty miles. Now, this is not true for those who earn a percentage of the load. So why is this so important? Well, as always, I'll use our company as an example. If I do say so myself, I book pretty high-paying loads, which is great. But also, those loads often require deadhead of 200 to sometimes 500 miles if we're going from Colorado back to Utah, for example. As a driver being paid a percentage, you do not get compensated for that deadhead. On the other hand, the high-paying load also trickles down to you and you make more money. As a driver getting paid on a per-mile basis, you absolutely do get compensated for that deadhead. So you might be thinking, who cares? If I'm a percentage driver, I still get more money because you booked such a great load. Yes, however, I will be the first to admit that there have been times, not many thankfully, where I book a great load picking up 300 miles away, the driver is going to the shipper, is almost there, and the broker calls me and tells me that the load is canceled until tomorrow. As a driver being paid per mile, you get compensated for those 300 deadhead miles you just did in vain. But as a driver getting paid a percentage of the load, you're just as much out of luck as we are.
Meaning no money.
Consideration 3. Market. This is a big one to consider when choosing between being paid per mile and being paid a percentage of the load. The market is a volatile beast, going up, down, sideways, diagonally, and so on. When the market is as great as it is today, you will absolutely benefit from being paid a percentage of each load. The rates are super high, which means those rates trickle down to you and you get paid more. But what happens if the market turns like it did when COVID hit? I already mentioned that we were in deep trouble in April of 2020, but I never mentioned numbers. So when COVID hit, in the month of April, our owner-operated truck brought in a total of $9,885 during the whole month. Now, considering the fact that we made $44,000 gross last month, $9,885 is a disaster. And when you get paid a percentage of the load, when we suffer, you suffer just as much. Now, as a driver who's getting compensated on a per mile basis, your income is not as affected by the market. Let's take April 2020 as an example because that was a disaster. At those times, if you were getting paid close to $1, you were already good, but most of the time it was much less than $1 per mile. If we as a carrier were to book a $400 load that runs 600 miles, we are in trouble because we're getting only $400 on 600 miles. That is an awful rate per mile. However, you as the driver getting paid on a per mile basis are still getting compensated for those 600 miles. Basically, even if we make less, you're still making the same amount. After all, just because the market is bad does not mean that the distance between point A and point B decreased, right? So I hope I gave you something to think about and something to consider when choosing how you want to get paid. I will see you guys in the next video.